The Queen of Dragons reclined upon her throne of obsidian and bone, her scales gleaming like molten gold beneath the light of the chamber's fire pits. Every move of her vast wings stirred the smoke in curling patterns, as though even the air bowed to her majesty. She was no ordinary dragon, but the sovereign of giants, her wingspan blotting out suns when she chose to ascend the skies. Her court trembled before her not merely out of duty, but because of the force of her presence, which pressed down like a mountain upon their chests. She was magnificent, indomitable, and untouchable, or so she believed. Around her gathered the lords and ladies of her kind, titans of fire and claw who ruled the mountains and seas of their empire. They spoke of conquest and dominion, their voices rolling like thunder through the vast cavern. It was a banquet, a gathering to honor centuries of victories, and the air shimmered with heat from braziers large enough to incinerate armies. Servants scurried, shadows against the brilliance of dragon fire, and goblets carved from meteors overflowed with molten drink. Yet in this feast of triumph and glory, a single jest cut sharper than any blade. One of the rival lords, a scarred beast with scales black as the void, turned his eyes upon the queen and allowed a slow, rumbling laugh to escape his throat. "Perhaps," he said, his words dripping venom, "our queen's bloodline grows so desperate that she might one day look to the vermin of humankind for her heirs." The court erupted. A roar of laughter swept the chamber, so loud that stalactites trembled and dust rained from the ceiling. Some clawed the ground in amusement. Others beat their wings, sending shock waves through the hall. It was the kind of ridicule that spread like wildfire, impossible to quench once it had been sparked. The queen rose, her golden wings unfurling, blotting out the glow of the fires with their brilliance. Her eyes, molten orbs of fury, swept over her subjects, silencing many though not all. She opened her jaws and flames poured forth, not in attack but in contempt. "Do you think me so weak," she roared, "that I would stoop to the fragile flesh of humans? A spark may warm a hearth, but it cannot ignite a storm. And I am the storm." Her voice shook the cavern, reverberating until the very stones seemed ready to crumble. For a moment silence reigned, and the mocking lord bowed his head in feigned respect. Yet even in submission his lips curved into a smirk, and the whispers that followed carried on the insult long after the queen's fury had passed. The feast resumed, but the queen felt no triumph in her rebuke. Her mind was no longer upon the laughter of her court, but upon a memory buried deep within her heart, one she had sworn never to recall. The words of the mocking lord had struck a chord, and though she would not admit it, they carried with them a truth she could not dismiss. Centuries ago, when her reign was young and unchallenged, she had encountered a human unlike any other. He was no sorcerer or king, but a warrior, scarred and mortal, who had stood against impossible odds to defend a city doomed to burn beneath dragon fire. She had descended upon that place with the fury of her kind, intent on claiming tribute, and yet he had faced her without trembling. His blade could not pierce her scales, his shield could not withstand her flame, and yet he stood. When others fled, he stood. When her talons crushed the walls, he did not retreat. His courage was an ember that refused to die, and for reasons she had never understood, she spared him. What began as curiosity became something she dared not name. In secret, she returned to him, drawn not by his strength but by his defiance, his refusal to bow even before the Queen of Dragons. His fragility should have disgusted her. Instead, it fascinated her. In his weakness there was a strength that no dragon possessed, the ability to endure despite certainty of death. One night, when stars burned like silver fire, she allowed herself a moment of forbidden closeness, a single act she later swore to erase from her soul. He was gone soon after, consumed by the brevity of mortal years, and she never spoke of him again. Now, standing in her throne room centuries later, she felt something stir within her, something that turned the jeers of her court into a haunting echo. She had dismissed it at first as a trick of her mind or an ailment of her body, but as the weeks passed, the truth became undeniable. Deep within her vast form, life quickened. It moved. It grew. And with each restless flutter, she was reminded of the night she had broken her own laws. She dismissed the court early, her voice sharp as a blade, and retreated into the solitude of her chambers. The laughter of her lord still clung to her ears like chains. She paced the cavernous space, her claws carving grooves into the stone. Every step shook the floor, but the tremor that troubled her heart was greater than any her body could cause. "Impossible," she whispered, her voice breaking. Yet the impossible moved again within her. She lowered her massive body to the ground, curling her wings around herself as though they could shield her from the truth. The memory of a human's eyes returned, steady and unflinching even in the face of her flame. For centuries she had mocked the weakness of mortals, yet now the seed of one lived within her, daring to grow in defiance of all law, all tradition, all reason. A queen could not afford doubt. A queen could not afford fear. Yet as her claws dug into stone and her eyes burned with the weight of secrets, she realized that her reign stood upon a precipice she could neither control nor escape. The court would never forgive. Her enemies would seize the chance to overthrow her. Her people would call it blasphemy. To breed with a human was unthinkable. To bear a child of such union was heresy. And yet, the truth quickened. She closed her eyes, hearing once more the laughter of her court, their voices jeering at the thought of her desperation. Perhaps our queen will turn to humans. The insult that had been meant to diminish her now threatened to define her. A shiver of life stirred within her belly, stronger this time, undeniable. She did not roar. She did not curse. She only whispered words no dragon had ever spoken before. What if they are wrong? The chamber was silent save for the beating of her heart, each thud like the toll of a war drum. In that silence she understood that the laughter of her court would not be the end of this tale. It would be the beginning. Whispers moved through the mountain halls like smoke seeping through cracks. The queen had not been seen in weeks, and her absence from the gatherings of her kind stirred unease among even the most loyal of her court. Some whispered that age had finally taken its toll, though dragons lived beyond centuries. Others claimed she had fallen victim to a hidden curse. The cruelest voices, those of her rivals, spoke of weakness and shame. They remembered the laughter from the banquet and carried it further. Perhaps the jest of human blood had cut closer to truth than anyone realized. Within the heart of her volcanic stronghold, the queen withdrew from sight. She could no longer conceal the changes in her colossal form. Beneath her armored scales life pulsed and swelled, and the weight of it bent even her proud posture. Pain came in waves fierce enough to make her talons splinter the stone. She hid it from her subjects, but the midwives of her court knew. They came in silence, ancient dragonesses skilled in the arts of bringing forth heirs, though none had ever faced a labor such as this. The air inside the chamber grew thick with heat as the queen writhed upon the obsidian floor. Each roar shook the mountain above, sending avalanches tumbling down its slopes. Fire erupted from her jaws, uncontrollably searing the walls, until molten rock dripped like tears of the earth. The midwives circled her massive body, murmuring words of courage, yet their eyes betrayed dread. To see their queen in agony was to see the empire itself on the edge of collapse. Hours stretched like centuries. Her strength was legendary, yet even legends falter. At last a cry pierced the chamber, not of pain, but of life. The first child slid from the queen's body, encased in flame and shimmering in a halo of molten light. The midwives gasped in awe. Before them lay a dragonling unlike any they had ever seen, his scales radiant gold streaked with crimson fire, wings already strong enough to unfurl, his breath smoking with embers though he had drawn only his first gasp. This was the heir they had awaited, a child who embodied the glory of dragonkind. The queen collapsed back upon the stone, exhaustion threatening to claim her, yet the pain had not ended. Another wave seized her, sharper and deeper, and she realized with shock that her ordeal was not complete. A second presence pressed within her, struggling toward the light. Panic flashed in the eyes of the midwives. Twins were unheard of among dragons, an omen written in no scroll. They scrambled to prepare, their talons clattering against the floor. Moments later the second child emerged, and the chamber fell silent. Where the first had been flame incarnate, the second was flesh. A small, fragile body lay gasping upon the stone, human in shape, skin soft where scales had been, tiny fists clenching as though to grasp the very air itself. His eyes opened, glowing faintly with an inner fire that marked him as no ordinary mortal, but still undeniably human. The midwives recoiled in horror. Some hissed in disbelief, others whispered of curses and doom. "This cannot be," one muttered. "A human from the womb of our queen. This is an abomination." Another spat. "We must end it before the court learns. If word spreads, the empire will fall." The queen rose despite her agony, towering above them, her eyes burning hotter than the flames of her birth. She drew both children close with her talons, one blazing with dragon fire, the other trembling but alive. Her voice shook the walls. "They are both mine. Touch them, and I will reduce you to ash." The midwives bowed, though fear lingered in their eyes. None dared defy her command, yet their whispers carried the scandal into the dark corridors beyond the chamber. Servants who glimpsed the strange child hurried away with wide eyes and trembling limbs. Rumor spread faster than fire across dry fields. By the time the queen gathered her strength, the empire was already drowning in speculation. In the council chamber, the lords and ladies convened unbidden, their wings stirring storms of dust as accusations flew. Some demanded the human child be destroyed to preserve purity. Others feared prophecy, recalling fragment of ancient verse that spoke of flesh and flame united. To them the child was not a curse, but a warning of destiny. When the queen finally entered, her golden scales dulled by exhaustion, yet her gaze unyielding, the chamber fell silent. She carried both children within her wings, one radiant as the sun, the other fragile but glowing with quiet fire. She set them before the council, and her voice rang clear. "This is my blood, both of them. One of scale, one of flesh, but both mine. To deny them is to deny me." Her words rippled through the chamber like a thunderclap. No one dared meet her eyes, yet unease twisted their faces. They had sworn loyalty to their queen, but tradition was iron, and heresy burned deeper than flame. What she demanded was no mere acceptance of heirs, but a rewriting of history itself. For long moments the silence lingered until a mocking lord from the banquet spoke. His voice was smooth, yet edged with venom. "Majesty, you ask us to embrace impossibility. A human cannot be heir to the throne of dragons. To keep it alive is to invite rebellion. Already whispers grow among the clans. They say your reign weakens, that your judgment falters, that your pride has birthed ruin." The queen did not lash out, though her claws flexed against a stone. She stepped forward until her shadow swallowed him. "They may whisper," she said, her tone cold as volcanic stone. "But whispers cannot change truth. The impossible lives, and it is mine. If any challenge my right, they may face me in fire and claw." The chamber quaked with her words. None spoke again, though their silence was not loyalty but fear. The queen knew it, yet she cared only for the warmth of the two small lives pressed against her scales. She carried them from the chamber, her wings folding around them like shields. Alone in her private cavern, she looked down at them. The dragon-born child slept soundly, his breath rising in gentle puffs of smoke. The human-born stirred restlessly, his small hands clenching as though ready to fight a world that already sought to deny him. She studied him, seeing not weakness but the same defiance she once admired in his father. A fragile ember perhaps, but an ember that might ignite flame where none believed possible. Outside the stronghold the wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it the whispers of rebellion. Already dragons questioned whether their queen had doomed them all. In hidden chambers her rivals schemed, their laughter once mocking now sharpened into daggers of intent. The queen pressed her snout close to her children and whispered words no one else would hear. "They think you are curse or prophecy. They think you will break us. But I will make the world tremble for daring to doubt you." The human-born child opened his glowing eyes, and for a heartbeat the queen felt as though he understood. The mountain groaned as fire surged through its veins. Somewhere deep in the halls of the empire, the first sparks of insurrection began to kindle, and above it all the queen knew that what had begun in laughter would end in fire. Years passed like the turning of distant stars, and the mountain's stronghold echoed with the cries of children who were no longer helpless infants but growing heirs. The court watched with wary eyes as the twins took their first steps into a world that had never known their like. Every breath they drew seemed to challenge the order of dragonkind. The dragon-born twin grew swiftly, his body sculpted by fire and scale. His wings stretched wide enough to stir storms before he was old enough to speak. Flames danced from his jaws when his temper flared, and the lords of the court looked upon him with awe. He was the image of what they expected from their queen's bloodline, a prince of fire destined to carry the empire into a new age of dominion. Songs whispered of him in the deep places of mountains, and the elders spoke his name with reverence. But the human-born twin walked a different path. His body was small and fragile, and he stumbled often where his brother soared. His skin bore no scales, his back no wings. Among dragonlings he was a creature apart, mocked and shunned by those who could not accept that he shared the same royal blood. When they exhaled sparks in play, his breath was only warm. When they wrestled in sport, his bones bruised easily. His every step reminded the court of their queen's shame, and whispers followed him wherever he went. Yet what he lacked in strength, he carried in wit. From the earliest days he watched with eyes sharp as daggers, studying, learning, calculating. He spoke later than his brother, but when he did, his words carried weight beyond his years. Where his sibling acted, he considered. Where his brother fought, he thought. And more often than not, it was his cunning that rescued them both from trouble. The queen watched them with pride and sorrow entwined. She loved them both fiercely, yet she could not blind herself to the weight of tradition. The council pressed her at every opportunity to discard the human-born child, to banish him into obscurity, to preserve the purity of their throne. Their words dripped with venom disguised as counsel. Majesty, you endanger us all. Keep the dragonborn and all will follow. Cast away the other before his presence invites rebellion. But she refused. Again and again, her roar silenced them. Both are mine, she declared, and both shall remain. Yet with each refusal her authority eroded, like stone worn down by the persistence of water. Even her allies grew uneasy, for to defend the human-born child was to invite the scorn of the clans. The twins themselves felt the burden of their fate, though they were too young to grasp its depth. The dragonborn loved his brother with the ferocity of fire. When others mocked, he defended him with tooth and claw. When rivals struck, he struck harder. Yet even he did not understand why the world recoiled from the boy he loved as kin. He only knew that without him he felt incomplete. For the human-born, the truth was clearer. He knew he was different, knew that the sneers carried weight, knew that his life was tolerated only because of the queen's protection. He grew wary, sharper than any child should be, and in that sharpness lay a resilience that no one anticipated. Where others sought to break him, he found ways to endure. Where others saw weakness, he discovered strength. And in the quiet of the night, when his brother slept, he dreamed of finding a place where he was more than a shadow in the court of dragons. It was during these years that the first fragments of prophecy returned to light. Deep in the vaults of the ancients, scribes unearthed forgotten scrolls etched into obsidian tablets. They spoke of a union of flesh and flame, of twins born from impossible union. One of scale and one of skin, whose coming would either shatter the empire or raise it higher than the stars. The words were cryptic, but they spread like wildfire through the clans. To some it was confirmation of doom, to others a promise of destiny. The queen guarded the prophecy in silence, neither denying nor confirming its weight. Yet within her heart she felt its truth. She saw in the way her sons balanced each other, one fierce and one cunning, one born of fire and one of flesh. She feared what the world would do when it realized what they might become. As the twins grew, so too did the hostility of the empire. When the dragonborn trained in the art of flame, hundreds gathered to watch his prowess. His wings carried him high above the peaks, and his roars split the sky. The court swelled with pride at his every victory. Meanwhile, the human-born trained in solitude. He studied texts of war and wisdom, listened at doors where he was not wanted, and learned to weave strategy from fragments of overheard conversations. While his brother wielded flame, he wielded knowledge. But knowledge earned him no applause, only suspicion. One evening, as the twins sparred before the queen, their bond revealed itself in startling fashion. The dragonborn lashed out too fiercely, his claws blazing with fire, and the human-born, unarmed and unarmored, should have fallen. Yet with a cry he leapt aside and seized a loose shard of obsidian from the ground. He struck not with brute force, but with precision, knocking his brother off balance just enough to end the clash. For a heartbeat the chamber was silent. The boy had bested his dragonborn brother, not with strength but with foresight. The lords who watched hissed in outrage. He dishonors the bloodline with tricks, one snarled. "This human cannot be allowed to stand beside our prince." But the queen only smiled faintly, her eyes unreadable. She saw in that moment what the others could not. Where the dragonborn embodied the might of dragons, the human-born carried the cunning of humanity, and together they were more than either alone. Still, dissent grew louder. Clans gathered in secret, whispering of rebellion. Some swore they would never kneel to a half-blood, even as a consort to their rightful heir. Others warned that the prophecy spoke not of glory but of ruin, that the human-born would bring destruction to their kind. The queen stood alone against the tide, her wings spread wide to shield her sons. Yet even she could not silence the storm forever. Her enemies gathered strength in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. The laughter that had once mocked her now returned in whispers of insurrection. One night, as the mountains slumbered beneath a sky of burning stars, the queen looked upon her sons as they slept side by side. The dragonborn sprawled in comfort, flames flickering from his nostrils. The human-born curled tightly, clutching a shard of obsidian as though it were a sword. She lowered her head and whispered words only the stone would hear. "The world will never accept you, but you were born to change it." And as she spoke, far beyond the mountains, shadows moved among the stars. An enemy unlike any dragon or human prepares descent, drawn by the scent of prophecy and the weakness of a divided empire. The night sky burned with fire not born of dragons, but of machines descending from a void. They came in legions vast enough to blot out the stars, a tide of iron and hunger that devoured everything in their path. World had fallen to them. Stars dimmed in their wake, and now their gaze fixed upon the empire dragons. The queen stood upon the highest peak of her mountain stronghold, her golden scales reflecting the flames of the approaching storm. She had known this day would come. The prophecy whispered it. Flesh and flame united against an enemy beyond imagining. Yet even in her foresight, she had not known the scale of the threat. Below her the clans gathered, wings spreading in fearful defiance, their roars shaking the valleys. But for all their might, dread curled through them. Fire had failed against these machines before, and it might fail again. Beside her stood her sons. The dragonborn now grown into a prince of unmatched strength, his wings vast, his breath hotter than molten stone. He snarled at the sky, eager to strike, eager to prove himself as the savior of his people. His scales gleamed in the firelight, every inch of him a testament to the pride of dragons. The human-born stood at his side, smaller, fragile in comparison, yet his eyes glowed with a light sharper than any flame. Where his brother's body was power, his mind was a blade honed on years of scorn and survival. He had studied the patterns of war, the strategies of both humans and dragons, and he saw in the enemy's formation weaknesses invisible to others. The queen's gaze lingered on both of them, pride and fear wrestling in her chest. The court had mocked her. The clans had whispered rebellion. Yet here stood the proof of her choice, the impossible heirs born of love and defiance. She spread her wings, her roar silencing the restless host. "This is the hour we were forged for," she declared, her voice carrying across mountains. "Our enemies think us divided, but tonight we burn as one, flesh and flame together. None shall survive who dare challenge us." The machines descended in torrents, their forms shifting like living storms of steel. They released beams that carved mountains, drones that swarmed in clouds thick as locusts. Dragons leapt into the skies, fire pouring from their jaws, wings beating storms into the air. The first clash shook the heavens. Fire met steel, and the night exploded in chaos. The dragonborn prince surged into battle at the forefront. His flames scorched the machines, his talons ripped through their armor, his roars shattered their swarms. He was a comet of destruction blazing across the dark. Yet even his might faltered against the endless tide. For every machine he tore down 10 more descended. Fire seared their shells, but they rebuilt, shifting, adapting, learning. Rage burned in him, but rage alone could not win. On the cliffs below, the human-born commanded with clarity. His eyes followed the patterns, every movement of the machines, every adaptation they made. Where others saw chaos, he saw design. He shouted orders to the dragons, directing their fury into coordinated strikes, leading them to exploit weaknesses, drawing the enemy into traps of fire and stone. His voice carried authority beyond his years, and though many still doubted him, the results could not be denied. The machines faltered under his cunning. Together the twins became more than the sum of their parts. The dragonborn wielded fire as a sword. The human-born wielded wisdom as a shield. When the machines drove the dragons back, the prince's fury broke their advance. When the machines adapted, the human-born's mind found the next strike. For the first time in centuries, dragons fought not as scattered tyrants, but as a unified force. Yet the enemy was vast, and victory demanded more than battle. At the heart of the swarm descended a colossus, a machine world within itself, its core pulsing with energy strong enough to consume entire mountains. It unleashed a beam of light that tore through the valley, annihilating dragons by the dozens. The empire trembled. Despair spread. The queen spread her wings and hurled herself into the sky. She struck at the colossus with every ounce of her power, fire pouring from her throat in a torrent that split the clouds. Her claws hammered against its shell. Her wings battered its defenses. But even her might could not pierce at heart. The colossus struck back, a beam that engulfed her. For a moment it seemed she would fall, but her sons rose together. The dragonborn crashed against the machine with fury, tearing open wounds in its armor. The human-born climbed upon its surface, his small form darting where no dragon could fit, his eyes glowing as he reached for the core. The fire in his blood, faint though it was, answered. He touched the heart of the machine, and where dragon fire alone could not succeed, flesh and flame together burned through. His human hands guided the power. His dragon fire eyes unleashed it. The colossus shrieked as its core imploded, light cascading across the battlefield. The explosion lit the sky brighter than dawn. The swarm faltered, broken without their core. Dragons surged forward, their roars a symphony of triumph. The machines fell in heaps of twisted metal. The stars above revealed once more. Silence followed, heavy and reverent. The queen descended, her wings battered, her body scarred, but her head held high. Her sons landed beside her, one blazing with power, the other trembling yet unbroken. The court gathered, their eyes wide with awe. No whispers now, no laughter, only silence before the truth they could no longer deny. The mocking lord who had once sneered at the queen's bloodline lowered his head, his voice hushed. They are not curse, they are salvation. The queen looked upon her sons, and her voice rang with quiet triumph. They laughed at the impossible. Now the impossible rules. The clans bowed, one by one, wings folding in surrender not to shame but to reverence. The prophecy had come to pass, not as doom but as deliverance. Flesh and flame together had broken the unbreakable. The dragonborn roared, his fire lighting the sky. The human-born stood silent, his eyes glowing, already turning toward horizons his people could not yet imagine. For though victory was theirs, he saw the future written in the stars. The world was larger than dragons knew, and destiny had only begun to unfold. The queen closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again the laughter of that night long ago. What had once been a wound now was her greatest vindication. She had chosen to believe in what others mocked, and in that belief her empire endured. The mountains shook with the roars of dragons, a sound of unity not heard since the dawn of their kind. Above them the sky was clear once more, yet the light that filled it was not only from the stars. It came from the twins who stood at the center of it all, one of fire and one of flesh, bound not by blood alone but by destiny. And in that moment the empire of dragons was reborn.